The morning mist hung heavy over the Kenyan savannah when Dr. Sarah Mitchell first heard the distressed chirping. She had been studying bird migration patterns for the Kenya Wildlife Service for 3 years, but this sound was different. It carried a desperate urgency that made her stomach clench with worry. Sarah adjusted her binoculars and scanned the acacia trees scattered across the landscape. The sound grew louder as she approached a cluster of thorny bushes near a dried riverbed. Her research assistant, James Kaprotic, followed close behind, his weathered face creased with concern. "Doctor, that crying has been going on since dawn," James whispered in his gentle Kalenjin accent. "The local herders say they have never heard such a sound before." Sarah nodded, her blonde ponytail catching the early sunlight as she crept forward. The chirping intensified, high-pitched, and frantic. Through her binoculars, she spotted movement in a partially collapsed nest about 15 feet up in a dead baobab tree. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A tiny bird, no bigger than her thumb, struggled desperately at the edge of the broken nest. But this was not an ordinary hatchling. The creature was completely white, its feathers pale as fresh snow, its eyes a startling pink-red color. An albino chick, alone and clearly in distress. "James, do you see that?" Sarah lowered her binoculars, her voice filled with wonder and concern. James squinted upward and gasped. In his 45 years living in this region, he had seen countless birds, but never anything like this ghostly white creature. "It is like a spirit bird," he murmured. "But where are its parents?" Sarah studied the area around the nest through her binoculars again. That's when she noticed the dark shape on the ground beneath the tree. Her heart sank as she realized what she was looking at. There, she pointed downward, on the ground near the base of the tree. Both researchers hurried to the spot. What they found broke Sarah's heart. An adult female weaver bird lay motionless on the rocky ground, her bright yellow and brown feathers dulled by dirt and blood. Her body was twisted at an unnatural angle, suggesting she had fallen from a great height. Sarah knelt beside the bird, her trained eye immediately assessing the situation. The female's left wing was clearly broken, bent backward in a way that made Sarah wince. Dark stains on her breast feathers indicated internal injuries. But what made Sarah's pulse quicken was the faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall of the bird's tiny chest. "She's still alive," Sarah breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. James crouched beside her, his experienced hands hovering over the injured bird without touching. "But barely, doctor. Look at these injuries." The mother bird's condition was critical. Along with the broken wing, Sarah could see a gash across her head where she had likely struck a rock during her fall. Her left leg appeared damaged, possibly broken, and her breathing was shallow and labored. Above them, the albino chick's cries grew more desperate. The little creature had somehow sensed its mother's presence below, but could not reach her. Its pink eyes darted frantically between the researchers and the ground where its mother lay dying. Sarah's mind raced. In all her years of wildlife research, she had never encountered an albino bird in the wild. Such creatures were extraordinarily rare, and their survival rate was typically very low. Without their mother's protection and care, this chick would almost certainly die within hours. "We need to help them both," Sarah said, her voice firm with determination. James looked uncertain. "Doctor, you know the protocols. We are researchers, not wildlife rehabilitators. And the mother bird, she's fighting to live," Sarah interrupted. "Look at her. Even in this condition, she's fighting. And that chick up there needs her." Sarah carefully examined the mother bird more closely. The weaver bird, probably no more than 2 years old based on her size, showed signs of having been an exceptional mother. Her breast feathers were worn from feeding, and despite her injuries, her body condition suggested she had been taking good care of herself and her offspring. The nest above told a story of dedication. Even from the ground, Sarah could see it was expertly woven, with the characteristic round entrance that weaver birds created for protection. The fact that only one chick remained suggested the others had already fledged successfully, making this albino hatchling likely the youngest of the brood. "James, how far are we from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center?" Sarah asked, her mind already forming a plan. "About 40 minutes by vehicle, Doctor. But Dr. Hatchling is away this week at a conference in Nairobi." Sarah bit her lip, thinking quickly. Dr. Peter Hatchling ran the region's only licensed wildlife rehabilitation facility, and, without him, their options were limited. But she couldn't simply walk away from the situation. What about the veterinary clinic in town? Dr. Kamau treats some wildlife cases, doesn't she? James nodded slowly. Yes, but she specializes in livestock. She has helped with injured eagles before, but nothing this small. The albino chick's cries seemed to pierce directly through Sarah's heart. She looked up at the tiny white form silhouetted against the morning sky, then down at the barely breathing mother bird. An idea began to form in her mind, born from desperation, but grounded in her scientific training. "James, I need you to help me collect both of them. Very carefully." "Doctor, are you certain? If we move the mother bird and she dies during transport?" "If we don't move her, she dies here," Sarah said simply. "And then the chick dies too. At least this way, they have a chance." Sarah retrieved her field kit from their vehicle, pulling out a small, soft cloth she used for handling delicate equipment. She approached the mother bird with infinite care, speaking in soft, soothing tones as she gently wrapped the injured creature. "Easy, little mother," she whispered. "We're going to help you and your baby." The bird's eyes fluttered open briefly as Sarah lifted her. They were bright black, alert despite the severe injuries, and Sarah could swear she saw a spark of intelligence there, as if the bird understood that help had arrived. Getting the chick down from the nest proved more challenging. The baobab tree's trunk was too thick and smooth to climb easily, and the nest was positioned on a branch that looked ready to break under any additional weight. James, however, had grown up climbing trees for honey and bird eggs. Despite his age, he moved up the trunk with surprising agility, using traditional techniques his father had taught him decades earlier. The albino chick watched his approach with wary pink eyes, its tiny body trembling with fear and exhaustion. "The little one is very weak," James called down softly. "It has been crying for hours." When James gently cupped his hands around the chick, it offered no resistance. The tiny creature was clearly exhausted from its ordeal. Its white down feathers were sparse and fluffy, providing little protection against the elements. Most striking were its pink eyes, which seemed to glow in the morning light. As James climbed down with the chick, Sarah noticed something remarkable. The mother bird, despite her critical condition, had begun making soft, barely audible calls. The chick immediately responded with its own weak chirps. "They're communicating," Sarah marveled. Even now, she's trying to comfort her baby. The drive to town was tense. Sarah had fashioned a small makeshift incubator from a cardboard box lined with soft cloth, keeping both birds together so they could hear each other. The mother bird's breathing remained shallow, but steady, while the chick nestled close to her warmth. Dr. Grace Kamau was just opening her veterinary clinic when Sarah and James arrived. A tall, elegant woman in her 50s, Dr. Kamau had built her reputation treating cattle and goats for the local farming communities. But her eyes widened with professional interest when Sarah explained their emergency. "An albino chick?" Dr. Kamau repeated, washing her hands thoroughly. "I have read about such cases, but never seen one. And the mother is still alive." "Barely," Sarah admitted. "But she's fighting." Dr. Kamau's examination was swift but thorough. She used a pediatric stethoscope to listen to the mother bird's heart and breathing, her practiced hands checking for additional injuries. "The wing is definitely broken," she confirmed. "Multiple fractures, and there's significant trauma to the chest cavity." But she paused, her expression thoughtful. "Her heart rhythm is strong. Birds are incredibly resilient creatures." The examination of the albino chick revealed additional concerns. The little bird was severely underweight and dehydrated. Its development was delayed, likely due to the genetic condition that caused its albinism. Dr. Kamau, Sarah asked quietly, what are their chances? The veterinarian was silent for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. Individually? Very poor. The mother bird has injuries that would challenge a much larger animal, and albino birds rarely survive in the wild, even under the best circumstances. And together? Dr. Kamau's expression softened. Together? That changes everything. If we can stabilize the mother, her presence will give the chick the best possible chance. But it will require intensive care, around-the-clock monitoring, and she hesitated. And what? And a commitment that goes far beyond standard wildlife rehabilitation protocols. This kind of care, for birds this small, it's almost unprecedented in our region. Sarah looked down at the tiny white chick, now resting peacefully beside its injured mother. The mother bird's eyes were closed, but her breathing seemed slightly stronger than before. Every few minutes, she would make a soft sound, and the chick would respond with a barely audible peep. Dr. Kamau, what would it take? What would we need to do? The veterinarian explained the challenges ahead. The mother bird would require immediate surgery to set her broken wing and treat her internal injuries. The procedure would be delicate and dangerous for such a small creature. Even if she survived the surgery, infection was a constant threat. The albino chick faced different, but equally serious challenges. Without its mother's ability to hunt and provide food, it would need to be hand-fed every 2 hours around the clock. Its genetic condition made it more susceptible to illness and stress. Most critically, it would need to learn essential survival skills that normally would have been taught by its parents. There's something else, Dr. Kamau added gently. Even if both birds survive and recover, releasing them back to the wild may not be possible. The chick's albinism makes it an easy target for predators. And if the mother's wing doesn't heal perfectly, her flying ability will be compromised. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had hoped that saving these birds would mean returning them to their natural habitat. The idea that they might never be free again was heartbreaking. But Dr. Kamau continued, seeing Sarah's expression, there are alternatives. Educational programs, breeding programs for rare genetic variations, research opportunities. These birds could contribute to science and conservation in ways that might help their entire species. James, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, finally spoke up. Doctor, in my culture, we believe that when nature presents us with something this rare, this special, it is a test, a chance to prove our wisdom and compassion. He gestured toward the birds. This little white one, it is like a gift, but gifts come with responsibilities. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of James's words. She looked at Dr. Kamau. What do we do first? First, we stabilize the mother. Surgery within the next few hours, while she still has strength. Then, we establish a feeding schedule for the chick. And then, Dr. Kamau smiled slightly. Then, we take it one day at a time and see if these two fighters have the will to live that I think they do. As Dr. Kamau prepared for surgery, Sarah found herself thinking about the remarkable bond between mother and chick. Even in her critical condition, the mother bird continued to respond to her offspring's calls. The chick, despite being hungry and exhausted, remained calm as long as it could hear its mother nearby. The surgery would take several hours. Sarah decided to stay at the clinic, helping however she could and monitoring the chick's condition. As she settled into a chair beside the makeshift incubator, she wondered about the events that had led to this moment. How had the mother bird fallen? Had she been attacked by a predator while defending her unusual offspring? Had the nest been damaged by wind or rain? And how long had the albino chick been calling for help before Sarah found them? What Sarah didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The mother bird's injuries were more complex than initially apparent, and the chick's unique genetics would present challenges that none of them could anticipate. As the afternoon wore on, and Dr. Kamau worked to save the mother bird's life, Sarah watched the albino chick sleep fitfully in its warm, safe shelter. The tiny creature's pale feathers caught the light from the clinic windows, making it look almost ethereal. "Don't worry, little one," Sarah whispered. "We're going to do everything we can for both of you." The chick stirred at her voice, opening one pink eye briefly before settling back into sleep. In that moment, Sarah made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it required, she would see this story through to whatever end awaited these remarkable birds. Outside the clinic, the Kenyan sun climbed higher in the sky, marking the passage of time as 3 humans worked to save 2 small lives. The mother bird fought for survival on the operating table, while her albino offspring rested in safety for the first time since the accident that had changed both their lives forever. The real test of their bond, their survival instincts, and human compassion was just beginning. 3 days after the surgery, Dr. Kamau emerged from her office with news that would change everything. The mother bird, against all odds, had not only survived the complex procedure, but was showing remarkable signs of recovery. Her wing had been successfully set with tiny pins smaller than needles, and the internal bleeding had been stopped. "She's a fighter," Dr. Kamau told Sarah with genuine admiration in her voice. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've rarely seen such determination in a creature so small." The real breakthrough had come the previous evening. For the first time since the accident, the mother bird had eaten on her own, just a few drops of sugar water and tiny insects, but it was a crucial step toward recovery. Sarah had barely left the clinic since bringing the birds in. She had taken leave from her research position, telling herself it would only be for a week or 2. That was 3 weeks ago, and she showed no signs of leaving. Her colleagues thought she had lost her mind, abandoning important migration studies for 2 small birds. But Sarah knew better. What was happening here transcended ordinary wildlife rehabilitation. The bond between the albino chick and its mother was teaching her things about avian behavior that textbooks had never covered. The chick, which Sarah had begun calling Hope, had grown stronger each day. Its white feathers were filling in beautifully, creating a soft, downy coat that made it look like a small cloud with bright pink eyes. Most remarkably, Hope had learned to respond to human caregivers while maintaining its connection to its mother. "Look at this," Sarah whispered to James, who had become equally invested in the bird's recovery. Hope was perched on a small branch they had installed in the enlarged enclosure. The mother bird, who they had named Courage, sat nearby on a lower perch that accommodated her healing wing. What amazed Sarah was how they communicated. Courage would make a soft clicking sound, and Hope would immediately turn its head in her direction. When Hope moved too far away, Courage would give a sharp chirp, and the young bird would return to her side. It was like watching a constant conversation between mother and child. "They are teaching each other," James observed quietly. "The mother is learning to trust us because she sees that we care for her baby. And the baby is learning to be brave because its mother is not afraid." Dr. Kamau had been documenting the rehabilitation process extensively. She had contacted colleagues at wildlife centers across Africa, and everyone agreed that this case was unprecedented. An albino bird surviving and thriving with its injured mother was unheard of. "I've been in touch with Dr. Elizabeth Thompson at the International Center for Avian Genetics in South Africa," Dr. Kamau told Sarah. "She wants to come see them personally." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and concern. Scientific attention could bring resources and expertise, but it might also mean losing control of the bird's care. What does she want to do? Study them primarily. Hope's genetic makeup could provide insights into albinism in wild bird populations. And Courage's recovery from such severe injuries could help develop new treatment protocols for small bird rehabilitation. But there was something else Dr. Kamau hadn't yet shared. The previous day, while cleaning Courage's enclosure, she had noticed something that changed her understanding of the mother bird's condition. "Sarah, I need to show you something." About Courage's wing. They approached the enclosure where both birds were resting. Courage had her injured wing tucked against her body, as she had since the surgery. But Dr. Kamau had noticed subtle movements that suggested more healing than expected. "Watch her when she thinks we're not looking," Dr. Kamau instructed. They stepped back from the enclosure and waited. After a few minutes, Courage began preening herself. As she twisted to reach her back feathers, she briefly extended her injured wing. The movement was careful and limited, but it was movement nonetheless. Her wing isn't just healing, Sarah breathed. It's healing well. Dr. Kamau nodded. Better than I dare hope. The bone structure is aligning properly, and she's regaining muscle control. With continued physical therapy, she might regain significant flight capability. This news brought new possibilities and new concerns. If Courage could fly again, the question of releasing both birds back to the wild became viable. But Hope's albinism remained a serious survival challenge. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Thompson arrived from South Africa 2 days later, an energetic woman in her 60s with silver hair and intense blue eyes. Her reputation preceded her. She had spent 4 decades studying rare genetic variations in African bird populations. "May I see them?" was the first thing she said after introductions. Dr. Thompson's examination of both birds was thorough and gentle. She spoke to them in soft tones while conducting various tests, measuring wingspan, checking reflexes, and observing behavior patterns. "Remarkable," she murmured repeatedly. "Absolutely remarkable." What Dr. Thompson found challenged conventional wisdom about albino birds in the wild. Hope's pink eyes, while unusual, showed excellent focus and tracking ability. His hearing was actually more acute than normal, possibly compensating for the visual challenges that albinism could create. "This young bird has adapted to its condition better than any case I've studied," Dr. Thompson announced. "The mother's presence during development has been crucial. She's taught him to use his enhanced hearing to locate food and identify threats." But the most significant discovery came when Dr. Thompson observed their feeding behavior. Courage had developed a unique technique for helping Hope hunt. She would make specific calls that directed her offspring's attention to prey, essentially creating auditory maps that compensated for Hope's visual limitations. They've developed their own communication system, Dr. Thompson explained to the gathered team. Courage has modified her natural parenting instincts to address Hope's special needs. And Hope has learned to interpret these signals with remarkable precision. Dr. Thompson's recommendation surprised everyone. These birds should be released, but not in the traditional way. Her proposal was revolutionary. Rather than simply releasing them and hoping for the best, she suggested creating a controlled release program. They would establish a protected territory where the birds could live freely, but with ongoing monitoring and support. Hope's albinism will always make him vulnerable, she explained. But with his mother's guidance and a safe territory, he can not only survive, but potentially teach us about adaptation and resilience in ways we've never understood before. The location Dr. Thompson had in mind was perfect for such a program. The Mbatini Nature Reserve, about 2 hours from the clinic, had a diverse ecosystem that supported large weaver bird populations. More importantly, it had 24-hour security that could help protect unusual wildlife. But first, both birds needed to complete their rehabilitation. Courage required several more weeks of wing therapy, and Hope needed to demonstrate that he could hunt successfully using his specialized skills. Sarah threw herself into this new phase of care with renewed energy. She worked with both birds daily, creating hunting exercises that challenge Hope while building Courage's flight strength. The breakthrough moment came on a sunny Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the initial rescue. Sarah was conducting a routine feeding session when Hope suddenly stopped eating the insects she was offering. Instead, he cocked his head to one side, listening intently. Then, with lightning speed, Hope darted across the enclosure and snatched a small spider that had wandered into their space. He had detected and caught wild prey entirely on his own. Courage's response was immediate and emotional. She burst into a series of celebratory calls that echoed through the clinic. Hope, clearly proud of his achievement, puffed out his white chest feathers and chirped back enthusiastically. "He did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. He actually did it. James, who had witnessed the moment, was grinning broadly. The little warrior has learned to hunt like his mother taught him. Dr. Kamau documented every detail of the hunting's success. This was the evidence they needed that Hope could potentially survive in the wild with appropriate support. The next test came when Dr. Thompson returned with a portable flight cage, a large enclosure that would allow Courage to test her wing strength safely. The entire team held their breath as the mother bird approached the perch closest to the ceiling. Courage looked at Hope, who had positioned himself on a lower perch. She made a soft call, and he responded with an encouraging chirp. Then, for the first time since her accident, Courage spread her wings and took flight. The flight was brief, just from one perch to another, but it was controlled and confident. Her injured wing held strong, and her landing was precise. Hope immediately flew to her side, his white feathers brilliant in the morning sunlight streaming through the cage. "They're ready," Dr. Thompson announced. "Both of them are ready for the next phase." Plans for the controlled release began immediately. The Mbatini Nature Reserve had agreed to participate in the experimental program. A special territory would be established with supplemental feeding stations and monitoring equipment. Most importantly, trained observers would track the bird's progress daily. But Sarah faced a personal dilemma. Her research supervisor had been patient, but her leave of absence couldn't continue indefinitely. Returning to her migration studies would mean leaving Hope and Courage just as they began their new life. The solution came from Dr. Thompson. "Sarah, how would you feel about leading the monitoring program? It would involve relocating to Mbatini, but it would also mean documenting what could become the most important case study in adaptive wildlife rehabilitation ever recorded." The offer was tempting, but Sarah worried about the risks. What if the release failed? What if Hope couldn't adapt to the wild despite all their preparation? Her answer came that evening as she watched the two birds settle in for sleep. Courage had positioned herself protectively near Hope, her head turned slightly toward him even as she dozed. Hope, completely relaxed and secure, had tucked his head under his wing in perfect mimicry of his mother's sleeping position. They had taught each other so much. Courage had learned to adapt her natural instincts to help her unique offspring, while Hope had developed extraordinary skills to overcome his genetic challenges. Together, they had proven that love and determination could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. "I'll do it," Sarah told Dr. Thompson the next morning. "I'll lead the monitoring program." The preparation for release took another 2 weeks. Both birds underwent final health checks, and Hope's hunting skills were tested in increasingly challenging scenarios. He passed every test, often surprising his human caregivers with innovative techniques he had developed. The day before release, Sarah spent hours with both birds, talking to them softly and offering final reassurances. She knew that once they were released, their relationship would change. She would observe from a distance rather than participating in their daily care. "You've been amazing," she whispered to Hope, who tilted his white head at the sound of her voice. "Both of you have been absolutely amazing." Courage made a soft sound that Sarah had learned to interpret as contentment. After weeks of intensive care, the mother bird had developed a remarkable trust in her human caregivers. She seemed to understand that they wanted what was best for her and her offspring. As Sarah prepared to leave the clinic that evening, she took one last look at the two birds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new possibilities. The controlled release would test everything they had learned about adaptation, survival, and the power of the bond between mother and child. Hope caught her eye and made a soft chirping sound. For just a moment, Sarah could have sworn the young albino bird was saying goodbye, expressing gratitude for the humans who had given him and his mother a second chance at life. The sun set over the Kenyan landscape as Sarah drove home, her mind filled with anticipation and hope for what the morning would bring. After months of intensive care, Courage and Hope were about to begin the greatest test of their lives, their return to the wild. The morning of release dawned clear and bright over Mbatini Nature Reserve. Sarah arrived before sunrise, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. After 4 months of intensive care, Hope and Courage were about to face their ultimate test, survival in the wild. The release site had been carefully chosen. A grove of fever trees near a seasonal stream provided ideal weaver bird habitat with multiple nesting options and abundant insect life. More importantly, it was in a section of the reserve with minimal predator activity and excellent visibility for the monitoring team. Dr. Thompson had flown in the night before, bringing with her cutting-edge tracking equipment. Tiny GPS transmitters, weighing less than a paper clip, had been attached to both birds. These would allow the team to monitor their movements while interfering minimally with their natural behavior. "Are you ready?" Dr. Kamau asked Sarah as they prepared to transport the birds to the release site. Sarah nodded, though her stomach was churning with worry. Months of preparation had led to this moment, but nothing could guarantee success. Hope's albinism would always make him vulnerable, and Courage's wing, while healed, had never been tested in true wilderness conditions. The transport enclosure sat in the back of their vehicle, covered with a light cloth to keep the birds calm. Inside, Hope and Courage waited quietly, their bond as strong as ever. Over the past weeks, Sarah had noticed that they seemed to sense something important was approaching. Their behavior had become more alert, more purposeful. At the release site, a small crowd had gathered. Local park rangers, research assistants, and several officials from the Kenya Wildlife Service had come to witness what many considered a historic moment. Dr. Thompson had documented only 3 previous cases of successful albino bird releases worldwide, and none had involved such extensive rehabilitation. Before we open the enclosure, Dr. Thompson addressed the group. "I want everyone to understand what we're hoping to observe. These birds have developed unique survival strategies during their rehabilitation. Hope has learned to hunt using enhanced hearing and his mother's guidance calls. Courage has adapted her natural behaviors to support her offspring's special needs." Sarah positioned herself about 50 feet from the enclosure, her binoculars ready and notebook in hand. James stood nearby with a video camera, documenting every moment for future study. Dr. Kamau approached the transport enclosure and slowly lifted the cover. Inside, Hope and Courage sat side by side on their familiar perch, blinking in the sudden brightness. For several long minutes, neither bird moved. They seemed to be assessing their new environment, processing the sounds and smells of the wild. Then, Courage made a soft call, the same encouraging sound she had used throughout Hope's development. Hope responded immediately, spreading his brilliant white wings and flying to a nearby branch. His flight was strong and confident, his landing perfect. The watching crowd held their breath as Hope looked around, his pink eyes scanning the trees and undergrowth. This was the critical moment. Would his specialized skills work in the real world? Courage followed her offspring, her own flight slightly more cautious due to her previously injured wing. But she reached the branch beside Hope without difficulty, her landing graceful and controlled. "So far, so good," Dr. Thompson murmured, making notes on her tablet. What happened next amazed everyone present. Instead of immediately exploring their new territory, both birds began calling to each other in a complex pattern of sounds. It wasn't random chirping, it was clearly communication, with Courage describing their environment and Hope responding with his own observations. They're mapping the territory together, Sarah realized. She's teaching him the layout using sound. For the next hour, the 2 birds moved systematically through the grove, with Courage providing audio descriptions and Hope testing his ability to navigate using these cues. It was like watching a carefully choreographed dance between teacher and student. The first real test came when Hope attempted to hunt independently. He had positioned himself on a branch overlooking a patch of bare ground where insects were active. Sarah watched nervously as the young albino bird cocked his head, listening intently. Suddenly, Hope dove from his perch with remarkable precision, snatching a grasshopper from the ground before returning to his branch. The hunt was flawless, executed with the confidence of a bird that had never known captivity. Courage's reaction was immediate and proud. She burst into a series of celebratory calls that echoed through the grove, announcing her offspring's success to the world. "He did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He actually did it." The first day of freedom passed smoothly. Both birds demonstrated strong hunting skills, with Hope catching insects using his enhanced hearing, while Courage provided backup support and guidance. They had established a basic territory around 3 large fever trees, creating a safe zone that offered multiple escape routes and hunting opportunities. But the real challenge would come during their first night in the wild. Nocturnal predators posed the greatest threat to small birds, and Hope's white plumage would make him visible even in darkness. Sarah and the monitoring team maintained a vigil throughout the night, using infrared cameras to track the birds' behavior without disturbing them. What they observed was remarkable. Courage had chosen a sleeping site deep within a thorn bush, virtually invisible from ground predators. She had positioned herself between Hope and the most likely approach routes, creating a protective barrier. Hope, meanwhile, had tucked himself into the thickest part of the bush, his white feathers hidden among the pale bark and thorns. "They've thought this through," Dr. Thompson observed quietly. "Courage has selected a sleeping site that maximizes protection for both of them." The night passed without incident. At dawn, both birds emerged from their shelter, apparently well-rested and ready for another day of exploration. Over the following weeks, Sarah documented behavior patterns that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about albino birds in the wild. Hope not only survived, but thrived, developing hunting techniques that were more sophisticated than those of normal birds. His enhanced hearing allowed him to detect prey that other birds missed entirely. He could locate insects moving beneath leaves, track small creatures through tall grass, and even identify different types of prey by their movement patterns. What's more, he was teaching these skills to other young weaver birds in the area. "Look at this," Sarah called Dr. Thompson's attention to a remarkable scene unfolding in the grove. A group of juvenile weaver birds had begun following Hope during his hunting expeditions. The young albino bird, rather than avoiding their attention, was demonstrating his techniques, showing them how to listen for subtle sounds that indicated prey. "He's become a teacher," Dr. Thompson marveled. "His disadvantage has become an advantage that he's sharing with others." Courage, meanwhile, had integrated seamlessly with the local weaver bird population. Her recovery from her injuries was so complete that newcomers to the area couldn't tell she had ever been hurt. But she continued to maintain her special bond with Hope, always staying within calling distance. The breakthrough moment came 2 months after release, when Hope began displaying courtship behavior. Despite his unusual appearance, a young female weaver bird had taken interest in him. Sarah watched in amazement as Hope performed the elaborate dance that male weaver birds use to attract mates. "This changes everything," Dr. Thompson said when Sarah reported the development. "If Hope can successfully mate, it means albino birds might be able to establish sustainable populations under the right conditions." The courtship was successful. Within weeks, Hope and his partner had built a nest, with Courage offering guidance and support throughout the process. The nest itself was a work of art, woven with extraordinary precision and reinforced beyond normal standards. When the eggs were laid, the entire monitoring team held their breath. Would Hope be able to successfully raise offspring? Would his mate accept his unique parenting approach? And, most importantly, would any of their chicks inherit Hope's albinism? The answers came 6 weeks later when 4 healthy chicks hatched. 2 were normally colored, dark brown with the typical weaver bird markings. But 2 were pure white, with the same pink eyes that had marked Hope as special from the beginning. "Albino twins," Sarah breathed, watching through her binoculars as Hope and his mate took turns feeding their unusual offspring. What happened next was unprecedented in wildlife research. Courage, now a grandmother, took an active role in raising the albino chicks. She applied the same specialized techniques she had used with Hope, teaching the new generation how to survive and thrive with their unique genetic makeup. The success of the release program attracted international attention. Wildlife rehabilitators from around the world came to study the techniques developed in Batini. The specialized communication methods, the protective territory establishment, and the gradual integration with wild populations became models for similar programs globally. But for Sarah, the true measure of success was much simpler. Every morning, she would arrive at her observation post to find Hope and his growing family active and healthy. The young albino bird that had once seemed destined for certain death was now a successful parent, teacher, and community member. Courage, now in her 3rd year, remained the matriarch of their small family group. Her recovery from near-fatal injuries was complete, her flying ability fully restored. But more importantly, her role as guide and protector had evolved into something beautiful and lasting. 6 months after the release, Dr. Thompson published her findings in the International Journal of Wildlife Rehabilitation. The paper, titled Adaptive Parenting in Genetic Variants, a case study in albino weaver bird survival, became one of the most cited wildlife papers of the decade. This case proves that with appropriate support and understanding, genetic variants that we once considered evolutionary dead ends can not only survive but contribute meaningfully to their species development, Dr. Thompson concluded in her paper. Sarah continued leading the monitoring program, but her role had evolved beyond simple observation. She had become the coordinator for the Batini Adaptive Wildlife Program, which now supported several cases of animals with genetic variations or significant injuries. The program's success led to policy changes at the national level. The Kenya Wildlife Service established new protocols for handling unusual wildlife cases, emphasizing rehabilitation over euthanasia and long-term monitoring over immediate release. But the most significant impact was on Sarah herself. Working with Hope and Courage had changed her understanding of resilience, adaptation, and the powerful bonds that exist in nature. She had entered the program as a researcher studying bird migration. She emerged as an advocate for the extraordinary potential that exists in every living creature. 1 year after the release, Sarah published her own paper documenting the psychological and behavioral aspects of the rehabilitation. She described the complex communication patterns that had developed between mother and offspring, the innovative hunting techniques, and the successful integration with wild populations. Hope and Courage taught us that survival isn't just about being normal, Sarah wrote in her conclusion. It's about adapting to your circumstances, supporting each other through challenges, and finding ways to turn perceived weaknesses into unique strengths. The paper became required reading in wildlife rehabilitation programs across Africa and beyond. But for Sarah, the words were more than academic theory. They were a living testament to the remarkable birds that had changed her life. Today, nearly 2 years after that first desperate morning when she heard an albino chick crying for help, Sarah continues her work in Batini. Hope and Courage's family has grown to include 6 healthy chicks, 4 of whom carry the albino gene. The grove of fever trees has become a thriving community of weaver birds, with Hope serving as an unofficial leader whose hunting expertise benefits the entire population. Courage, now an elderly bird by weaver standards, remains active and engaged with her extended family. Her injured wing, once thought permanently disabled, shows no signs of weakness. She flies with the same grace and confidence she had before her accident, proof that with proper care and determination, even the most serious injuries can heal completely. The monitoring program has documented over 200 successful hunts by Hope and his offspring, proving that albino birds can not only survive in the wild but excel in ways that benefit their entire community. Their enhanced hearing abilities have helped the colony detect approaching predators more quickly, while their unique appearance has actually deterred some threats, with potential predators appearing confused or hesitant when encountering the unusual white birds. Sarah often reflects on the chain of events that led to this remarkable success story. If she hadn't been in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, both Hope and Courage would have died in that grove beneath the baobab tree. If Dr. Kamau hadn't been willing to attempt surgery on such a small patient, or if Dr. Thompson hadn't championed their innovative release approach, the outcome would have been very different. But perhaps most importantly, if Courage hadn't fought so desperately to survive, driven by her determination to protect her unusual offspring, none of this would have been possible. Her love and dedication had saved not just her own life and hopes, but had opened new possibilities for wildlife rehabilitation worldwide. Standing in her observation post on a bright African morning, watching Hope teach his own chicks to hunt while Courage supervises from a nearby branch, Sarah feels a deep sense of gratitude. She had set out to save two small birds in distress. Instead, they had saved her, teaching her about courage, hope, and the extraordinary resilience that exists in the natural world. The albino hatchling's desperate cries that first morning had led to one of the most successful wildlife rehabilitation cases ever documented. But more than that, they had proven that with love, determination, and innovative thinking, even the most challenging circumstances could lead to remarkable triumphs. Hope's white feathers catch the morning sunlight as he demonstrates a hunting technique to his offspring, while Courage watches proudly from her perch. Their story continues each day, a living testament to the power of maternal love and the incredible potential that exists when humans choose to help rather than simply observe. The injured mother and her albino chick had found their second chance at life. In doing so, they had given countless other animals and the humans who care for them hope for their own second chances.